Imagine sailing thousands of kilometers through enemy-controlled waters in a small wooden fishing boat, disguised as local fishermen, knowing that if anyone discovered your true identity, you would almost certainly be tortured and executed. Now imagine that after weeks at sea, instead of turning for home, you climbed into fragile folding canoes under the cover of darkness and paddled directly into one of the most heavily defended harbors in the Japanese Empire. It sounds like the plot of a spy novel, yet it really happened. This was Operation Jaywick, one of the most daring commando raids of the Second World War. By 1943, the war in the Pacific had reached a critical stage. Japanese forces had conquered vast areas of Southeast Asia, including Singapore, which had fallen in February 1942 after what was considered Britain's greatest military defeat. Singapore Harbour had become a vital logistical hub for the Japanese Navy and merchant fleet. Ships carrying fuel, troops, ammunition, and supplies constantly moved through its docks, supporting military operations across the region. Striking the harbor would not only damage Japan's ability to wage war, but also demonstrate that nowhere was beyond the reach of Allied special forces. The idea for the raid came from Lieutenant Colonel Ivan Lyon, a British officer serving with Australia's newly formed Z Special Unit. Lyon had escaped from Singapore after its fall and possessed valuable knowledge of the surrounding islands, coastal waters, and local customs. Rather than launching a conventional military attack, he proposed something far more unconventional. A tiny force would travel to Singapore disguised as Malay fishermen aboard a captured Japanese-style fishing vessel. Once close enough, they would secretly launch folding canoes, paddle into the harbor at night, attach limpet mines to Japanese ships, and disappear before anyone realized what had happened. It was an incredibly risky plan. The raiders would have no air support, no nearby naval escort, and no possibility of reinforcement if something went wrong. Success depended entirely on deception, navigation, stealth, and perfect timing. The vessel chosen for the mission was an old Japanese fishing boat named the Krait. Although modest in appearance, the Krait became one of the most famous small ships of the war. The crew carefully modified her to resemble a local fishing vessel, complete with camouflage, fishing equipment, and supplies that would help maintain the disguise. Even the appearance of the Commandos was altered. Their uniforms were replaced with civilian clothing, and many darkened their skin and adopted local mannerisms to avoid attracting attention during any encounters with coastal inhabitants. The raiding party consisted of 14 men drawn from Australia, Britain, New Zealand, and the Netherlands. Each had been selected for exceptional physical endurance, courage, and specialized skills. They underwent intensive training in canoe handling, explosives, navigation, silent killing techniques, and survival. Every member understood that capture would almost certainly mean death. On the 2nd of September 1943, the Krait quietly departed Exmouth Gulf in Western Australia. The journey ahead covered more than 3,000 kilometers through waters patrolled by Japanese aircraft, warships, and coastal observers. For weeks, the crew lived the role of fishermen. They cast nets, displayed freshly caught fish on deck, and avoided behavior that might appear suspicious. Whenever other vessels appeared, everyone remained calm, trusting that their disguise would withstand inspection. The voyage itself became an extraordinary feat of seamanship. The Krait successfully navigated dangerous reefs, tropical storms, and heavily patrolled sea lanes without revealing her true purpose. At several points, Japanese patrols came close enough that discovery seemed inevitable. Yet luck, combined with meticulous preparation and convincing acting, allowed the little vessel to continue north unnoticed. Eventually, the Krait reached the remote islands south of Singapore. There, the Commandos established a hidden base among dense vegetation, carefully concealing both themselves and their equipment. During the day, they remained hidden, observing Japanese patrol patterns and waiting for the right opportunity. At night, they prepared the folding canoes, checked their explosives, and rehearsed the final stages of the mission. On the evening of the 24th of September, 6 commandos climbed into 3 collapsible canoes and began paddling silently towards Singapore Harbour. Every stroke of the paddle carried them deeper into enemy territory. They traveled only at night, hugging the coastline whenever possible and avoiding brightly lit areas. By dawn, they concealed themselves among mangrove swamps, remaining motionless throughout the day despite oppressive tropical heat, insects, and the constant fear of discovery. After reaching the harbor, the commandos separated to attack assigned targets. Their weapons were not rifles or machine guns, but limpet mines fitted with delayed action fuses. Swimming quietly beneath enormous merchant ships, they attached the magnetic explosives to the hulls below the waterline before slipping away into the darkness. The work demanded tremendous nerve. At any moment, they could have been spotted by sentries, illuminated by searchlights, or caught in the water with no chance of escape. Once every mine had been placed, the commandos paddled back toward their hidden island base, retracing the dangerous route they had followed into the harbor. They had no way of knowing whether their explosives had remained attached, or whether the attack would succeed. All they could do was continue withdrawing before daylight exposed their presence. During the early hours of the 27th of September, the harbor erupted in explosions. One after another, the limpet mines detonated beneath Japanese ships. 7 vessels totaling nearly 40,000 tons were sunk or severely damaged. Fires spread across the waterfront, confusion gripped Japanese authorities, and emergency crews scrambled to understand what had happened. The explosions caused significant disruption to shipping operations and demonstrated that even Singapore, regarded as one of Japan's safest bases, was vulnerable. Remarkably, the Japanese never immediately understood how the attack had been carried out. Some believed enemy submarines had penetrated the harbor, while others suspected aerial bombardment or sabotage by local resistance fighters. The possibility that a handful of commandos had paddled into the harbor in folding canoes seemed almost unbelievable. Meanwhile, the raiders quietly returned to the Krait. Without celebration or unnecessary delay, they prepared for the long voyage home. The return journey proved every bit as hazardous as the approach. Japanese forces had increased patrols throughout the region following the explosions, making discovery an ever-present danger. Yet once again the Krait's disguise held. The small vessel slowly made her way south through occupied waters until she finally reached Australia. Against extraordinary odds, every member of Operation Jaywick returned safely. Not a single commando had been killed, wounded, or captured. The mission became one of the most successful special operations of the entire Pacific War. It demonstrated that a tiny force, using careful planning and complete surprise, could inflict damage far beyond its numerical strength. However, the success came with unintended consequences. Japanese investigators, unable to determine exactly how the raid had been conducted, suspected local civilians had assisted the attackers. In the aftermath, Japanese security forces arrested numerous people throughout Singapore and subjected many to brutal interrogation. Several innocent civilians were executed during the crackdown, a tragic reminder that successful covert operations sometimes carried terrible consequences for those living under occupation. The triumph of Jaywick also encouraged Allied planners to consider repeating the operation. Lieutenant Colonel Ivan Lyon believed an even larger raid might achieve greater results using new underwater equipment and additional commandos. This proposal eventually became Operation Rimau in 1944. Unlike Jaywick, Rimau was compromised before the attack could be completed, leading to the deaths or capture of almost the entire force. The contrast between the two missions highlighted just how narrow the margin between spectacular success and complete disaster could be in clandestine warfare. Today, Operation Jaywick remains one of the finest examples of Allied special operations during the Second World War. It combined deception, courage, navigation, endurance, and meticulous planning into a mission that achieved results far beyond what anyone might have expected from just 14 men in a converted fishing boat. More than 80 years later, the image of the Krait slipping quietly through enemy waters and 6 commandos paddling silently towards Singapore Harbour continues to symbolize the extraordinary ingenuity and determination of Zay's special unit. It stands as proof that in war, boldness, preparation, and the willingness to attempt the impossible can sometimes change the course of history.